Hi, my name is Frank Schaefer, and I am a writer with a new book coming out for free called The Gospel of Zip. It's about my dog Zip. It's about my 56-year relationship with my wife. It's a how-to about what really works in life. And you know, one of the things I mention in the book is the things that are getting Jeannie and me through these Trump years, these years of division, these years of the failed left-wing culture war and the failed right-wing culture war. Yes, they both failed. We'll be talking about that, and my book talks about it. But how do we get through this time, no matter who we are, no matter what we believe? Well, one of the things that I'm finding very helpful is to delve into history, to give some sense of proportion to the moment we're in. Now, there's a lot of conspiracy theories and stupidity about history, too, that we have around us today. But one very reliable source, incredible pleasure for Jeannie and me, is a podcast called The Rest is History, hosted by Dominic Sandbrook and Tom Holland, two leading British historians and writers. Now, the great thing about this is that Dominic Sandbrook is a little bit to the right. He is a conservative who, for instance, interprets history like the Vietnam era and tells the truth about it when, for instance, many Americans supported Richard Nixon and the Vietnam War. And the majority of people, for instance, in 1968, watching the Chicago police riots with Mayor Daley, when they were polled, actually supported the police, not the yippies and the people demonstrating. On the other hand, Tom Holland is a historian, probably the best-known historian of ancient Roman history alive today, who has written widely on that, and he takes an opposing view. Now, why am I mentioning this? Not to discuss their views in particular, but here's two guys who do a terrific podcast together and represent slightly different ideological viewpoints. I mention this because, of course, this is just what's lacking in our country right now. Podcasts are usually conducted by people with very strong opinions in only one direction. I get a little bit of a hint of this when I do my podcast In Conversation with Frank Schaefer, and I interview authors from all different sorts of spectrum ideologically. For instance, the editor of the Wall Street Journal, or people who have won Pulitzer Prizes as authors and writers and scholars and other people, ardent feminists, people who are much more conservative when it comes to issues. And sometimes I hear from people who call themselves liberals that if you have someone like this on your show, I'll never watch it again, because they're so used to watching things and listening to things that are just tailor-made by the algorithms to suck people in and help us to only listen to people we agree with and egg us on to click on more stuff. I think a lot of us are aware of this now. But you know, I'm really grateful to the rest of history to help Jeannie and I get through this period, because when you look at history, it illumines the moment. Things aren't as bad as they seem. Or put it this way, things have been much worse in the past very often, and people have still survived. They've gotten married, they've fallen in love, they've had babies, they've pursued relationships, they've made homes in the midst of much worse chaos than we're in. Another point of watching the rest of history is that there's a much more balanced approach to what has happened in the past. It's non-ideological with both men, even though one is a little more to the left and one a little more to the right. Neither of them are ideologues, and that's so different than so many podcast hosts or people in the news media or people, you know, in various gatekeeper media empires, be that the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or Fox News. You kind of know where people are coming from. But Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook always surprise me because they put the truth as best they can understand it. Of course, neither claims to have the truth ahead of their own ideological position. That's very rare. Another person who's helping me get through this period of history is Evan Davis, who does a wonderful show every weekday, 5 days a week, called PM, which is the BBC Channel 4, that's Radio 4, BBC Radio 4 news show at 5 p.m. British time. So I listen to it around 12 noon, depending on daylight savings time. Every day I listen for the full hour and often get a better view of American politics and American news and Donald Trump and what's going on with the Democrats and all these things on BBC Radio 4 with Evan Davis than I do from American media that tends, again, to be more ideologically divided. So it's ironic that I go to the BBC for a more neutral telling and to Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook. This is a great gift these men are giving Jeannie and me during these years. It's one reason my blood pressure's still okay and I get up feeling sane. So how does this tie in with my book, The Gospel of Zip? Well, Zip is a dog, and I've learned from him that this whole idea about evolution of the survival of the fittest is really nonsense. It's the survival of the friendliest and the most cooperative that has led to, for instance, our hunter-gatherers being around long enough to produce modernity. And as divided as we are, and as big a mess as we are in, the reason people like Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook appeal to Jeannie and I, besides the fact that they're brilliant narrators and are very funny and self-deprecating people, and the reason Evan Davis's news on Radio 4 is so appealing to me and the way he covers subjects, whether it's the war in Israel between the Jewish state and Gaza, the Palestinians, the Muslims, these other entities, the place of the United Nations, etc., is because there are still people out there who care about objectivity and truth. And I find when I get out of the American context and get the best of the BBC or the best of Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook, and the rest is history, and you can sign up and become a member of their club or watch it for free on YouTube, that I get an angle that encourages me that there are people out there like that. Now, the funny thing is, who they mirror is not so much the American media and our divided press, and let alone Donald Trump and this idea of hating your enemies that he's trying to sell to people who call themselves Christians, this odd thing. But what I get out of this is an enlightening glimpse of the way we all wish things were. And it's why I've written my book. And it's why I'm doing something very unusual that you all, people who watch me, encouraged me to do when I asked you, and that is I'm posting it on YouTube on November 1st for free. And it's going to be everywhere, all 8 hours, because I've read the whole book out loud myself, looking into the camera with the teleprompter. And of course, that becomes an audio book too, so if you want to just listen to the sound on YouTube for free, it's an audio book at that point. Eventually, it will be an audio book, and it's also going to be coming out at about the same time on Amazon in print, and you can buy it for a very modest sum. I'm going to price it as low as they let me, much lower price than most books, and I'm going to do the same thing with the Kindle edition, but the free one on YouTube is there for a reason, and that is I want to help us all get through this moment of history. And you're going to be surprised at the sympathy that I give to some of the conservative whiplash against the culture wars that they have found to be very controversial and antagonistic. The sexual revolution, for instance, that has driven so many more conservative people crazy, the breakdown of the family, the higher rates of divorce. There's a lot to be said for a conservative view of history when it comes to family relationships. Conversely, there is a lot to be said for things that came out of the rise of, for instance, the gay rights movement, gay marriage, these other things that I also talk about. But what I really talk about is the fact that in my relationship with my wife and in my relationship with my children and with my 5 grandchildren and the daycare that I've given these 5 grandchildren all through the years as a caregiver myself, as well as being a writer, I have found real meaning in my life. And so how I'm getting through this period of history is paying a lot more attention to my wife and my love for her that I have after 56 years together, to my grandchildren and caring for them, and to my grown children and their needs, and the communication and the constant back and forth we have, than I am to politics. That doesn't mean I'm not watching the news and thinking about it, but I'm also listening to a lot more of Dominic Sandbrook and Tom Holland talking about Roman history and the Visigoths and British history and Henry VIII. And by the way, one of their best series is on 1968 and what happened with Nixon and the assassination of Luther King and the Kennedys and these others. Treat yourself and listen to them, and you'll know why when you read my book, if you do, and please do, or listen to it for free, why I talk about them and the fact that Jeannie does her stitching. She makes beautiful stitched pillows, and I'm sitting there with my dog Zip, and we're having a wonderful time together. And part of that is to do with the fact that we're listening to this, we're being inspired, but it also takes our minds out of this moment, not in an escapist way, but in a way that informs us that we can live more sane lives, because we're not caught up in the algorithms of only going to people we already agree with on all issues. Don't be manipulated by those algorithms. If you're a liberal, listen to Dominic and listen to Tom on The Rest is History, and remind yourself what it was like to listen to people who were A, reasonable, 2, very informed, no conspiracy theories, real history, real background, and treat yourself. Go to Radio 4 on BBC and listen to Evan Davis. Do it for a week and see the difference between that and American news coverage. You may agree or disagree on some of his points of view, but you will see a basic attempt to be fair. Do the things that gatekeepers used to do well when they were there and they were responsible. So anyway, that's how I'm getting through our present time. And when this book of mine it comes out, The Gospel of Zip, and it's everywhere, and it's for free. So I'm not trying to sell you anything, and there's no fundraising pitch, and I'm not trying to pull anything here, and I'm not selling presidential bitcoins, and my family's not profiting off of it, like somebody's family I know is profiting off the corruption of the presidency. But I think in my sincerity in trying to give you this book for free, and in pointing you towards other sources besides me, like The Rest is History, like Evan Davis and BBC Radio 4 every day, 5 p.m., British time, whatever time that is for you, 12 noon for me, depending on daylight savings, 1 p.m. some of the year, 12 noon other times. You'll see that this isn't about me, it's not about my points of view, but I am a fellow survivor of this moment. And there is a better time ahead of us, but it doesn't depend on electing a Democrat. And it doesn't depend on Trump leaving office, being replaced by a Republican. It depends on something totally different, which is what my book, The Gospel of Zip, is about. And what that something is the basic human values that actually give us all meaning. Whether you're a gun-toting member of MAGA or whether you are an ultra-liberal, in the end, what we all really care about, tell the truth now, is not correct politics, but good relationships. And good relationships start at home. They start with marriages that work. Yes, I'm old-fashioned. They start with relationships with your children that remain close through their entire lives. Yes, that is a conservative point of view, but it's also a liberal point of view. It's also a left-wing and right-wing point of view if we're honest about what really matters to us. And what really matters to us is not being right all the time about vaccines or conspiracy theories or homeschooling versus public school. It's our children and grandchildren and our relationships. And if you're not a parent, it's within your friendships and the people you're close to. And the message of my book, The Gospel of Zip, is very clear, and that is evolution has one rule. It's the survival of the friendliest and the people who know how to cooperate. And I see that with Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook. But it's also, and this is a sad thing, but it's true, and I'm not lying to you. If you look at the scientific facts, evolution wants lonely people dead. Everything shows that. Being lonely is worse for you than smoking or high blood pressure or heart disease or anything else. And so the most, I'd say, smartest thing anyone can do is what I talk about in The Gospel of Zip and lay out how it's worked in my own life in spite of all my failings. The fact that I was groomed to be an asshole by divine right because I was raised in a family that said men should dominate, blah, 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 blah. But I left that. And I still look back with gratitude, though, at the fact that I was in a home with two parents who loved their children, even though there was a big mess sometimes because of some of the evangelical excesses I was raised with. Nevertheless, what stuck was that what we all crave is order in our personal lives. We all crave friendships that work. We all crave love. And so I would say, please search out my book when it comes out. It's free on YouTube in about a month. On November 1st, it'll be everywhere for free. And it has its own website, no clever fundraising, nothing like that. It's also going to be on Amazon, priced as low as they will let me do it, because there's parameters. And the same with the Kindle edition, and eventually with the audiobook. But of course, the free book on Amazon is already an audiobook, or not Amazon, I'm sorry, on YouTube is already an audiobook. So just turn the sound down if you don't want to watch my face. And I had it professionally recorded and produced by someone who used to work for PBS with Jim Lair, who was on the NewsHour and has, the sound is terrific. He brought an old 20-year set of microphones with him so that we get this warm, wonderful tone that you can't get anymore. And you're not getting off my cell phone here, even though my iPhone is wonderful. Nevertheless, the old mics were the best, as anybody who does analog recording on 36 tracks could have told you about the Rolling Stones or the Beatles. We old guys did know some things. Anyway, look out for my book, The Gospel of Zip, on November 1, and please treat yourself to to Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook, and the rest is history. And they've got about 700 hours of stuff now out, unbelievable, about everything you've ever heard of. And when you get sick of the American media, tune in to BBC Radio 4, and that's at 5 p.m. Every day, British time. That's 12 noon here in the East Coast. And listen to Evan Davis and remind yourself of what journalism used to be. Thank you. My name is Frank Schaefer.